A warm welcome to everyone for our PCQuest 35 years journey from 1987 to 2022. Today, we will be discussing the advent of the PC in India in the 1980s. For that, we have executive business and life coach Shyam Malhotra, also former managing director of CyberMedia and the man who started it all for PCQuest. Welcome to the show, Shyam.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for the promotion. I was not the managing director. I was the chief editor-in-chief and executive director. So
Sure.
Just to clarify, but thank you
Sure.
so much.
Yeah.
Promotion after many years.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Go ahead. Happy to be here. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So, one thing, like, I think we have taken everything for granted. What was life like in India without the PC? Today, we can't even imagine the office or home without technology. The offices were like barren. There were no computers, nothing. So if you can just give a mood of how it was during those days.
You're really asking me to go back in time, but
Yes.
yeah, okay. So let's look at the office thing. So something which comes to mind obviously is that something called mail or dark used to come twice a day.
Okay.
And all the mail used to come in paper, and there used to be a person who would open it all up and put it into different uh, we had files which used to come. So every morning a file would come to your desk and you would mark mail to various people, or put aside the one that you wanted to work on, or you wanted to you send them off and they'll make a follow-up point. But essentially mail used to come twice a day, once in the morning and once later in the afternoon. I suspect in many offices it was not even twice a day. So today I think even that concept of mail coming in is kind of even email is getting obsolete. So therefore uh, what else offices? Well, yeah, for personal life, bank passbooks used to be updated maybe once a month, maybe once in 3 months, when you used to go and figure out, hey, listen, what has happened to my account? And we had these checkbooks on which on the left hand side you used to note down how much money has been deposited and how much has been removed, so that you knew what was there in your account. Otherwise it meant going to the bank to find out. And I had this problem that I would always invariably forget to and I would cut a check, but I would not put the amount. uh, so you invariably ran into problems. I mean, it's difficult to imagine what it was like. I mean, there was the check clearing used to take 3-4 days. In offices, there were all discussions were on projectors, slides. You used to make those uh, slides on what was it
Overhead
called?
projector.
Transparent paper,
Yeah.
overhead projector, and then you used to put it up there for people to see. And there used to be a great rush to make those overhead projector slides with different colored sketch pens and things of that nature. The most important tool of planners, the spreadsheet did not exist. So calculation, I can't even imagine how anyone worked without a spreadsheet, because I think it was vastly different.
Yeah, I know.
People could
Seriously, the
argue
the
that
way you described it, I can't even imagine it. Actually, it's like the head
you
hurts.
can't even imagine it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is before computers. Yeah. So even when computers came in, it was still very different from what it is today. I mean, the computer that I started working on first was uh, a big machine with a little green colored thing on top. That the monitor was green in color, and I think the speed was 14.4 kbps. There was a modem which was used to connect, and this was through the VSNL, the government VSNL thing, which had given the connection through the normal telephone line or whatever. I don't recall all the details. But the moment you dialed the thing, it would go beep, 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 and then the connection would finally happen. And 14.4 used to come early in the morning. So any work that I needed to do, and work at that point of meant trying to figure out how to use things more. I mean, there was not much work happening directly on computers at that point of time. And yes, editing used to happen. But bottom line is, if I wanted the editing could be done offline. You could just enter stuff and clean it up and take it out in a floppy and then give it to the person who would do the further work in in the magazine business. So magazine business was that the editing would happen and then it would go to somebody else, and then it used to go to a place where galleys were made, and galleys were again corrected, and then they were pasted up. And then after the paste up, they used to go to the press, and then the press, the photographs and all were taken, and then it went to printing. So it was a completely different process which was followed. But to get on the internet meant that one had to get up at 4 a.m. or 5 p.m. Or 5 a.m. Because otherwise the connections even then were slow. Even so, and there were very few. So, but yes, that was a world, an interesting world, and a world good to thank you for reminding me even for a few minutes that it existed.
Yeah, and actually, going back a bit, I'd like to know about the transition, like in the 80s. So, when the government announced the new computer policy, when people said PCs were coming, what was the mood in the country? I mean, did like most people say it would change life, or most people said kuch farak nahi padega, the union? So, what was it like when the computer was coming, and then what happened when it finally came? How did India change?
See, like any other change, I think there were a few evangelists, a few people who believed that this would be important, and there would not be a world without it. And they were the ones who would try to do all kinds of things. And obviously, the government, in the think tanks, there were people who thought that way. Otherwise, the government policies would not have uh, come out. And then they encouraged people to set up manufacturing. In fact, we started with manufacturing. There were 4 or 5 companies: DCM Data Products, ORG Systems, HCL, not the new HCL, the HCL of old, Wipro. All these companies started making computers, hardware, Usha, maybe some others. So there were a few evangelists, there were a few people who wanted to push this new thing called computers. And there was a lot of skepticism, cynicism, opposition. So, for instance, one of the early users of computers in India were banks, public sector banks at that time. And there, actually, the unions protested a lot. So they were not called computers, they were called ALPMs, automatic ledger posting machines, which was a way of bringing in a computer device, but with the only purpose of ledger postings, which was acceptable to the bank unions. So the ledgers got posted on these machines. But apart from that, no, it was not a computer. It was called an ALPM, and the software, etc., was designed for that working. Uh, 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 Computers were also mostly called word processors, used only for editing. So they were called word processors. So I think in some ways, maybe even the word computers was a little bit of a resistance. But nevertheless, I think there were people who believed in it, and they kept pushing it, and they kept just talking about it. And I think as and when the machines started coming in, then gradually, I think people got used to the idea, and they saw the benefits. But I think the major catching on only happened in the 90s. I think it was just the beginning. And India had hardware manufacturers, and they had software companies, which, what was the name? Softtech. So Softtech as a company, as an organization, developed its own word processor and its own spreadsheet and its own maybe PowerPoint also, I don't know. So they tried to market, but all this was in the 80s, I guess. Uh, uh, there was resistance, but I think ultimately the benefits that the machines gave in terms of work uh, kind of convinced people that they are not going to threaten our jobs, and we are not going to get displaced. And we can learn how to make it happen. But it took time.
So that's a very interesting thing. Even though like the NCP came in 84 and the PC started coming in, you said it took some time till the 90s for it to catch on. So when do you think the PC era actually began in India? Because in America, it began immediately. People started buying it in large numbers. When did the inflection point come in India? When could you say we became a PC country? Because time came when all offices had the PC.
I think that would be much later, but maybe you need to look at the old data quest issues and check out, the DTU top 20 rankings. And I do recall distinctly that at one point of time, I don't remember the year now, my apologies for that, the total industry size in the country was about 100 crores. So in one of the top 20 things that we compiled, the total size was 100 crores. Now this has to be after 85, maybe 86, maybe 87, somewhere along that time. So and therefore I said that the real numbers started moving perhaps in the 90s. So difficult to say when did we become a thing, but it's more easy to say when did we become a software country in terms of exports, and that probably happened in the latter part of the 90s, because by that time the early Indian software companies had started establishing, and I think the big rush came because of that Y2K scare, where a lot of stuff had to be rewritten, and a lot of it came to Indian organizations because they could get out people, churn out this thing. So that was one wave which happened 98, 99. And then the next wave was the call centers when they came in. And these two actually between them really spread the use of computers, not only internally, but also for export purposes, and made India a software company. That was not there in the 80s, obviously. 90s, I think the telecom policy came, which also then started pushing uh, uh, more privatization of telecom connectivity and things of that nature. That came in the early 90s. And once that came, then the connection started happening. So you see, I mean, the big thing about computers was that the usage went up dramatically when they got connected. Otherwise, the usage was minimal. I mean, it was like a personal accessory. It was not a tool that an organization could use. But when the connectivity happened, then it really started booming. So you are sitting on all the data in your archives. You
Sure,
can find it
will.
out from
Yeah,
the need. Yeah.
definitely. Yeah. So another thing I was like curious, because this is part of a PC Quest 35 year special. So 1987, you were there at the center of it all. And cyber media that way was revolutionary. Like you said, the market was just not even 100 crores. We came out with Data Quest in 82. So you already had an IT magazine. Then what was the thinking to come out with another IT magazine? I think it was initially PC World India. So I'd be very fascinated to know, that 85 to 87, how you brainstormed, whether you needed, what was the whole process of this magazine being born?
So the way I think the way it moved was that Data Quest was a magazine which was for the IT industry, but it was a business magazine for the IT industry. So it talked about, the size and the kind of companies and the kind of products and things of that nature. So somewhere along the line, it became obvious that the people who are using computers need different kinds of content. And therefore there was a need for a publication or a place where they could go to, from where they could learn how to use. And if this whole business of promoting computerization in the country really had to happen, if that 100 crore industry had to grow, it would not grow unless there were more takers. So I think the basic idea came from there, that there should be a magazine for the user and not for the industry, talking about technology and business size and trends and things of that nature. PC World was the first title that we took because we had a loose tie-up at that point of time with a group in the US called IDG. IDG content used to be used in Data Quest for the foreign news sections and things of that nature. So they had a magazine called PC World. So the initial arrangement was that we would publish PC World India in collaboration with them. So don't forget that the technology related information was very difficult to generate in India. We had no writers, we didn't know too much. We had people who either knew the language or who knew computers. We hardly had any people who could do both the things, So we said, let's do PC World in India. The first thing was, of course, to find an editor who would run it. And this we found in the Devashish Ghosh, now known as Dev Ghosh. He was, I think, working with ONGC before he joined us. And he was a computer person, but with a flair for writing or doing things different from there. So he was the first guy who we brought in and then launched the publication. But yes, again, there was a whole lot of skepticism and question mark. Second computer magazine, are you guys mad? I mean, people, I mean, those were the expressions on the faces of people, and I used to be in big trouble at home. My in-laws were very worried whether I could look after the family in this profession. So, and then after, okay, you're running one, now you've got to go two. What's wrong with you guys? But DataQuest was doing well, and it gave us the confidence that there would be a thing. And PCQuest then went on to PC World, and then PCQuest went on to do many many. I mean, for instance, later we started the bulletin board, which was a medium of information exchange. It was the first one to come out with CDs, which really changed the whole landscape because the CDs were made. I mean, somebody would sit in the office and download humongous amounts of games and utilities and various things, and then they were put onto a CD, and then the CD was put on the magazine and sent out. And nobody else had ever done that kind of a thing. So apart from making the CD, the bigger issue was how to make sure that it went to the press, and in the press it was put on and released on schedule to various stands across the country. And initially there was a lot of resistance to even that concept from the press itself. But we had good supporters, we had good people who would push through those things. So basic genesis, sorry, long answer, but the basic genesis was the need for computers to grow, and computers would grow if computer users would grow, and that would happen if somebody told them or helped them or gave them interesting things to work on. Hardware was easy, relatively, but software which could be used was not so easy. So that was the idea. And the initial usage of PCs was essentially, I think, word processing, spreadsheets, some amount of PowerPoints, and some games. Mandatory to have some games on. So we used to have, in our office, we used to have Pac-Man contests. So Pac-Man, the people used to score, okay, if you scored 100,000 in Pac-Man, you get a golden award or whatever else. So there were tournaments in the office which were organized on Pac-Man. That sound still is there in my ear because I would sit in the evening and practice for the tournament the next day.
So that's a very fascinating overview. It's pretty exhaustive. So I'll just like to end maybe on a personal note. Like when the smartphone came, I mean, for many it was traumatic. The whole life changed. They had to change their whole lifestyle. They couldn't imagine life without it. Unlike, US in the 60s, action began in 84, 85. And coincidentally, you were there in 82. So you have seen it all, PC, software, internet, liberalization. So how has been like your 35 to 40-year-old journey? Was it like, did it just happen naturally? You just like went from one era to another without thinking in other, or was there some trauma and like you had difficulty in going from one era? Because it's fascinating. You have seen it all. So on a personal note, I'd like to tell, or do you not think about it at all?
Well, I really don't know. No, it was not traumatic. I can definitely say that. Was it difficult? Not really, because I think maybe we were in a place where everybody else was similar, and so there was help available. I mean, if I wanted to know something, I would talk to a guy who would say, "Okay, do it like this." So there was no danger. And you see, we were using these things, the things that we wrote about. They used to come to our offices. We used to beta test them. We used to review them. So I don't think there was any difficulty in terms of making the transitions. And obviously, somewhere in the nature of the organization, the ethos, the culture of the organization, there was this thing about doing new things. Otherwise, the organization would not have existed per se. So I think it kind of, we used to think about it, what would make sense, how many numbers of copies, what the costing, this thing, what kind of content, how many pages to fill up with what kind, all that used to be done. But otherwise, it was a fairly smooth transition. There was a clear this thing that this particular technologies industry overall, whichever way you want to call it, would need push. So it didn't really stop with PCQuest. It went on to Voice and Data, and then the Channel magazines, and then I think we launched our online property in 1996,
Yeah, CIL,
which was
correct.
perhaps much earlier than most people. So I think the overall culture and the ethos and the thinking was that, okay, you got to keep looking at the future and keep pushing in that direction. So I think that made it easy in a manner of speaking.